Hello everyone, welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. Today we have just two things to talk about in this episode, the special election last week and the tariff situation as proposed by President Trump on so-called Liberation Day. Firstly, we're going to talk about the second biggest news of the week, which wasn't really big news at all, with the special elections. As I mentioned in the last episode, there were three special elections that political enthusiasts like me were watching. A special election, just so we're all up to date, is an irregularly scheduled election because of a vacancy, for whatever reason. There were three of these, as I mentioned. One was in Florida's 6th Congressional District, one was in the 1st Congressional District, also in Florida, and Wisconsin Supreme Court elections. Firstly, in Wisconsin, this was a Supreme Court race. I think this was a regularly scheduled one, but I think we can still classify it as a special election because it was at a weird time. This was officially a nonpartisan race, but it was nonpartisan only in name. The so-called the Democrat-aligned candidate, Susan Crawford, won by 10%. This is a very healthy margin, especially considering that Trump won the state by about 1%. So this would be a swing from Republican +1 to Democrat +10, an 11-point swing, very impressive. This is important because the Republican candidate was given millions and millions of dollars from Elon Musk. Republicans were really concerned about losing the seat because now there's a decent chance that Democrats will be able to redraw the congressional maps in the state of Wisconsin and get an extra House seat or two. Democrats were highly expected to win this seat, and they obviously did. Now, I think what's more interesting is Florida's election results. They show more, in my opinion. So Democrats did not win these seats, but that's who won the seats, as I said last episode, would be irrelevant. Who wins is almost always never the issue, at least when you're analyzing elections. If you're on the government side, that's all that matters, because if you win by one vote, you still won. But when you're looking at political trends and analysis, that matters. And obviously, Democrats lost these two seats. And that's unfortunate because that will give Republicans two more seats for their slim majority. But they weren't expected to win these seats anyway. So Democrats, there's a lot of good news here. This will give Republicans and the Trump administration a few more votes to work with as they try to push through their agenda. For the results, this was an impressive swing to Democrats. It was a 16 and 22 point swing from the last presidential election. A huge swing. My standard has always been 15 points as a safe seat. 15 points between the winner and the loser is quite a big margin. I mean, that would be basically anything less than like 43.5% and 43.5% to 57 and 15 point margin would be, I'm not going to do the math. Math has never been my thing. So the fact that 16 and 22 means that if these seats were more competitive, they absolutely would have flipped. The problem for Democrats is these seats are very, very, very safe by more than 30 points. So even though this is super impressive, they still were not able to win the seat. What does this mean for the midterm elections coming up? Well, first, special elections are unique because there's a lot of national attention from both politicians and the media as well as people like me. So trends that are achieved in special elections are almost never actually matched in general elections, but they almost always show the trend. It's clear that Democrats are on trend to pick up quite a few seats. An 11, 16, or 22 point swing is unlikely. Probably more like 6, and that's not statistical, that's just me throwing a number out there. Some Republicans are sitting on quite large margins, and they might lose. They could be sitting on 10 or 12 point margins, and they might get blown out. And there's some that might be sitting on very thin margins. Famously, Brian Fitzpatrick in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He, for the last 4 elections, it was close. Well, 2018 and 2020. I was wondering I really thought he was going to lose his seat, and then he won. And he won in 2022, and he won in 2024 by quite a large margin. So it's possible that even though it's a tight margin, they can still hold on. But you're going to see some variation. I would say on average about 6 as of right now. As I said, that's not scientific or statistical. That's just a guess. There are 16 seats that Republicans won by less than 5%. I would say these seats are in danger. So Democrats would be on a narrow path to a House majority. They won 215 last time. An extra 16 seats would be 231. And that's a narrow but not too bad of a majority. Because of the partisan nature of our politics and because of how districts are drawn, I don't expect a large wave like we saw in 2018 and 2006. That's just the nature of our politics right now and for the foreseeable future. Things have been hardening on both sides. But for Democrats, take solace that you are on the path to a House majority. For Republicans, they need to figure out how to turn this around. History shows that they will not, but there is still time. Clearly, the president is the problem here. It always goes back to the president. They can't just ditch the president because that would be very unpopular with their base. So they're kind of they kind of have to choose between their base or swing voters, which is always very tough. Now, for the tariffs, this is what everyone was talking about for the second half of last week. This news overwhelmed everything else that happened. And now trillions of dollars have been wiped from the global economy already. 6 trillion was the number that I saw floated around. The Dow is down below 40,000. Recession within the next year seems to be almost completely certain. The tech-heavy NASDAQ suffered a loss of 11% as of the weekend. The Trump administration better have an ace up its sleeve because if they don't, they're going to be in big trouble. There is one way around this, though, if Congress acts, which I'll get into it later. Global oil prices have tumbled to their lowest point in 4 years, which was at the end of the coronavirus pandemic. This came not only on the tariff announcement, but OPEC also decided to increase oil production by 411,000 barrels beginning in the month of May. So at a time when the economy is weakening and consumer demand is expected to drop, OPEC is dumping more oil onto the market. Great news for consumers with lower gas prices, but not good news for oil companies and their employees, as oil profits are now under significant pressure, and I suspect there are some oil rigs that are now not profitable, with U.S. oil in the low 60s, which is $10 a barrel lower than it was last week. So what has Congress done about this whole situation? Well, not much. The Senate has passed a resolution to halt tariffs on Canada, and that resolution passed with unanimous Democrat support and 4 Republicans, so it passed 51 to 48, and it had the backing of former leader Mitch McConnell, who's now on the back benches. The new Republican leader, Majority Leader Thune, who has said that he is opposed to the resolution because he wants to, quote, ensure President Trump has the tools to combat the flow of fentanyl from all directions, end quote. Needless to say, that's nonsense. Almost no fentanyl is coming in from Canada. Fentanyl last year that came from Canada was like basically nothing compared to what came from Mexico. And this resolution passed before Trump announced new tariffs, so we could see renewed pressure to pass another one in the coming days and weeks. Regardless, this resolution is dead on arrival in the House, and President Trump would have to sign it, and he's obviously not going to. So this would have to be the veto would have to be overridden, and the numbers are not there for that right now. What I'm most interested to see is how Republicans are going to react to this. I assume the first thing that needs to happen for them is to lose support in the polls. That's almost always the first thing to go, which Trump is already slipping in the polls, and this would probably accelerate it once the job losses and inflation numbers begin to mount. And speaking of the job losses, I'll explain that later that the U.S. economy did add a lot of jobs in March, but there are caveats there. Overall, the president's approval rating right now is flat, minus 2%, which I'd say is flat. The economy, it's down 10%. Inflation is down 13%. Of course, this is not including recent actions. I really struggle to see the economic or political angle here. Economically, these tariffs makes no sense because it would raise costs for businesses, consumers, and employers. The Federal Reserve would normally raise interest rates to stop inflation, but we are in a period now where higher interest rates would really harm economic growth. So the Fed might be stuck in a 1970s stagflation scenario where unemployment is high, but so is inflation. So if the Fed cuts interest rates, that could raise inflation. But if the Fed raises interest rates, that could really cause a crippling recession. So the Fed is probably not going to do anything for the foreseeable future. And that's exactly what Jerome Powell has said. Politically, it makes no sense either because Trump has just under 4 years left in office. Believe it or not, we are still less than 100 days into this administration. 4 years is barely enough time for businesses to move plants and rehire Americans. And say we are plunged into recession because consumer demand dries up because of higher prices. Businesses will have little incentive to move in here anyway because Americans aren't going to be buying. Republicans say that their tax plan will offset for these losses. Oh, it'll be the tax cuts. The tax cuts, that's what's going to save us. Well, first of all, that is not proven, and I suspect that won't be the case. And two, even if these tax cuts work miracles and single-handedly saves the American economy from a recession, not only does that still harm global demand, which makes it harder for American businesses to sell to other countries, and that was the whole point of doing this in the first place, these tax cuts haven't even been passed yet, and the party remains deeply divided on how to pass them. I remember they told us that these tax cuts would be passed within the first 100 days, and the chances of that are extremely slim. They've moved it to May, and then they moved it to June, and now I'm thinking maybe July or August, assuming Congress is not on a recess, which they probably will be. So I'll probably talk more about that next episode because there's been some news about that. There's been more fireworks back and forth. But needless to say, I don't expect any tax cuts in the next few weeks. Even if these tax cuts work miracles, they will not be in place for months. Meaning for now anyway, we still have to withstand everything that the tariffs are throwing at us. And also, the Trump tax cuts expire at the end of this year, which means starting in 2026, we will be hit with not only tariffs, but higher taxes. So what's our recipe here? We have higher prices, higher unemployment, more layoffs, higher taxes, all in an election year. This is the exact opposite of political strategy. Trump's plan makes no economic or political sense unless you're trying to send your party into opposition for a generation or longer. I don't see the plan. I don't see the purpose of this here. And where is our glorious leader? Well, on Friday, he went golfing. He basically hid from the media, and he posted on Truth Social that this policy is what it is. It's not going to change. But he also said that he spoke to the General Secretary of Vietnam and that a deal could be in the works. So I don't know exactly what the plan is here. Are these tariffs in place and aren't changing, or are they going to change? I don't know. As of the recording of this podcast, Trump has not spoken to the media. And the only thing that makes me feel slightly better is that the U.S. economy added 228,000 jobs in March, which was well above expectations. They were expecting about 140,000. Yet the unemployment rate rose to 4.2%. These numbers are remarkable considering the layoffs that the federal government has. They've laid off, I think, 75,000 people by certain estimates. So I don't know if they're still on the payroll and will be laid off, or if they just weren't included in these numbers for whatever reason, or conspiracy theory alert, or if the government is cooking the books. I don't know. Most of these gains came from healthcare, transportation, and warehousing. Wages also increased 3.8%, which is above inflation, so that's a good thing. But this obviously doesn't include most of the tariffs, because only some of them were in place in March, and all the ones that Trump announced on Wednesday were not in place because that was in April. And that being said, if you have a Republican congressman or senator, like I do, I urge you to contact them if these tariffs don't end up being lifted. I think the only way that these tariffs are going to go is if Congress forces the hand of the president. The president can't reach U-turn on this politically. It's too big. Just to give up would be humiliating. He would have to be forced. A bipartisan group of senators, Chuck Grassley and Maria Cantwell, first one's a Republican, the second one's a Democrat. By the way, Chuck Grassley is like as old as the hills. He's like 91 years old. But anyway, this law will require 48 hours from the president to notify of new tariffs, and Congress would have to approve of them within 60 days. This is a good law. This is how it should always have been. And it would prevent something like this from happening again. And will it be passed? No, I don't see that happening, at least not right now. It would have to be passed overwhelmingly, and then it would be vetoed, and then it would have to be overridden. So I don't see the political support for that. And I've been talking to some people behind the scenes. I talk to a lot of political people, no elected officials. I'm not that connected, but I've been comparing this to the Liz Truss moment when Liz Truss blew up her own government back in the UK 2.5 years ago. I've talked about it before. I urge you to look into it, but it's interesting that we're kind of seeing the same thing here, and that ended her political career. So I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. Thank you for listening. Please remember to like and subscribe and all that. I hate when I ask people to do that, especially at the beginning of a podcast. I think that's stupid because if you don't know if you like it until you listen to it. But if you liked it, please give it a like, share with family and friends. We are on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify as well as on YouTube. And thank you for listening. Hopefully there'll be better economic news next week. Bye-bye.